I've had the same issue. They, for whatever reason, love videos.
Yeah, they do.
Well, we're to 7 o'clock here, so
Yep.
I'm going to call the
Okay, get out of here.
session of the Lakewood City Council for Monday, September 14th order. I'd note that Council Member Whalen, though not here, is en route to his computer and should join us about in 10 minutes. Our first item for discussion is the Joint Landmarks and Heritage Advisory Board meeting and go over their work plan. And we were apparently having some technical difficulties on the part of some of the members of that committee, but we'll see what Ms. Schumacher can do to bring them on.
Mayor, it does look like Miss Beth Campbell, and Miss Joan Cooley are attending this evening by telephone, so that you will not have the video for them, but they will be attending by phone. One moment, and I'll pull them in.
Hi, this is Beth. I am officially unmuted now.
All right. And it looks
This is
like
Joan.
Ms. Campbell is too, or Cooley, excuse me.
This is Joan Cooley, and I've unmuted.
And is Glenn Spieth going to be here?
This is Courtney
He's
Burnett.
supposed to be.
I do believe he plans to join. Oh, I see he just joined the meeting.
There he is. So we have 3 by telephone. So Glenn, if you could unmute or be unmuted. All right.
Yeah, can you hear me now? This is Glenn Spieth.
Now we can hear you, Glenn. So we'll start off by going to Glenn Spieth and having you tell us a little bit about your work plan for the next year.
Right. This is the third try to enter this thing. So implement a historic streets recognition program. The signs for that have already been ordered, stored by the city, and they plan to go for a second grant to fund the installation next year, 2021. We're going to continue on the work with Clover Park School District to incorporate local history into the curriculum, and the board has expressed an interest in developing a pop-up museum once the school is back into person-to-person activities. Currently, nothing has been confirmed due to COVID. Research grant opportunities to fund additional historic markers throughout the
We just lost your audio, Glenn. We just lost Glenn.
Ooh.
One of you other committee members you able to pick up where Glenn left off, or do you have a different program?
No, we've all got the same thing. So, let's see, where was he? Oh, he was on the research grant opportunities to fund additional historic markers. We put that on hold right now because we're going to try and do the funding to finish the historic streets, to get the signs up and everything. So, I don't know if you guys have a picture of the signs. I think maybe you do, and they're beautiful and brown. Let's see. We're also going to try and update the touring map. We want to do that after we get the signs installed. And we also had a thing on there to work with Pretty Gritty Tours. They do walking tours, and they've had some really successful ones in downtown Tacoma. And so we want to try and get them to develop 1 or 2 for us. So, but that's on hold right now because you can only have like 5 people in a place at a time. So we want to develop a frequently asked questions for our LHAB website. So that's something we'll compile some questions and get our lovely staff people to put them on our part of the city website. And then exploring the use of community landmark designation for the Colonial Center, Western State Hospital, Roseley House, Villa Carmen, also known as Madeira, the Flet House, Little Church on the Prairie, Thornwood Castle, Muller Harkins Hangar, Tacoma Country and Golf Club, and the H Barn at Fort Slocum Park, and the Allen Little House. So it's quite a list, and I think we've got a couple others we can add on to that too. Currently, there's been some discussions going with Thornwood Castle because they might be interested in becoming a officially designated Lakewood landmark. So we'll talk to them about that, and then keep working on stuff through the fourth quarter and talk to the various property owners and see what they would like to do. And as always, we are actively recruiting new members, and we're working on engaging with the youth council. So we thought that would be kind of helpful with our whole pop-up museum idea and other things related to Washington State history curriculum in the schools. It's kind of nice to talk to some students and see what kind of things would be interesting for them. So that is our work plan.
Welcome back, Glenn. You're
Yeah, I'm back.
Beth Carey.
Yay!
Third or fourth dropout for me, and I can't get it on Zoom. Anyway,
So
are you? Do you have any questions that you need to ask
yeah, that was what
regarding this?
which is if any members of the council have questions. Mr. Bolke.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Glenn, and this is for the group, the Clover Park School District, who are you, have you just talked to the board, or is staff involved, and what grades are you? So who are you dealing with on staff, and what's the timeline, and what grades are you going to work with?
Courtney and I don't know beyond that because we haven't been in for any kind of meetings for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, Washington State history is typically fourth grade, and
Okay.
Has been ninth grade, but they might have bumped it down to 8th. And so we're looking at basically those two groups, and basically if we can get a hold of what the curriculum, goals and whatever are, then we can work on some stuff and then offer it up to the instructors and see, what they're interested in.
So far, have you only worked with the board, or presented it to the board at a meeting or something?
We haven't talked to the school
We've
board
had
at
a
all.
number of meetings. Well, we've
Yeah,
had a
there's been
number of
meetings
meetings
with
on our
the-
own board.
Oh, so you
Yeah.
haven't spoken
No,
to the
it's not the
schools?
school board. No.
Oh.
We talked to the district superintendent, the one before the current one.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
That's
So
a
everything's
ways
been
back.
put on hold. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so are you applying for the grant? Did you guys apply for the historical grant again? Oh, the grant you got this year. Are you in the queue for next year at the historical grant program at the county for next year?
That I don't know for sure.
Okay.
Courtney might know, but
Yeah. Well, I think they changed the timing on it a little bit because they can't have any face-to-face meetings
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
right now. So, yeah.
That's right, Beth, they pushed it, Joan here, they pushed it back, and I can't remember how many months, but yeah, they extended the filing deadline significantly, I think.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Any other
Right.
questions?
any other questions?
Ooh, Glenn,
Yes.
this is Joan again. I was just
Yes.
thinking about the facts section that we're looking forward to entering in with our touring map, or on the website rather. And I think our group would certainly welcome any input from council if they think of any facts that, or anything that pops into their mind, or of things that they have heard that would be of interest to include in the website. Sometimes
Yes.
those of us who work closely forget what our community or the people we're trying to reach really want to ask. So we'd love to have your input on that.
Right.
Yeah.
This is Don Anderson. I had a question. Do you have any additional plaques on rocks sites identified? And
We've got several. There's one for Thornwood, which we haven't been able to get a rock for, and everything's kind of got all of the stuff that's ready to go. They're both ready to be installed, except they've got some problems with rocks and owners and so forth. So we're ready, but
okay.
We did lose one porcelainized photo off of the Colonial Center historic marker this last week. So we'll have to make another one for that.
And where is that one placed over there?
It's right in front of the new, what used to be Ludwig's drugstore, and now it's a physical therapy place right on the corner, Bridgeport.
With the big bow window.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to see that. It's been a while.
All right. Any other questions from council?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, sir. I just want to thank the members of the LHAB for the hard work they have done and will continue to do. I know it has been my pleasure to sit and listen and watch as they work. And I'd also like to point out that Courtney Burnell and Karen Devereux do an excellent job of helping this board do the work it does. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, John.
I too would like to thank the board for all their hard work. There's a lot of hidden history in Lakewood, and there's no reason it should be hidden. So bringing that to light, I think, is very valuable for the sense of community. Though we've only been here as an incorporated city now for 24 years. The history obviously goes back much, much longer than that. And it's important for the people who both come to the community and who were raised here to know more about it. So thanks again for all your hard work, and your pay's doubled for next year. So
Thank you.
thanks again. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we now move to a review of the second quarter 2020 financial report. For this, we have Ms. Kraus.
Good evening. Can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yes, it's up.
So I'm only going to go over a few sections of the report. As you can see on the first page, I did add a few new sections, nothing that you haven't seen before, but I think it goes well with the report. So I've added the financial impact and the action strategies that you've been hearing about from the city manager, and it was presented to you back in June. You have also seen the April, May, and June comparison sales tax. And then I also added the Public Works Engineering Development Services. So that's new information. So this is just a reminder of the action strategies that the city manager has set out. And he had mentioned that this is something that he's put into place for the remainder of this year and going into 2021. So depending how our financial conditions are, these things will stay in place. And I will say that the departments are adhering to it, so which is greatly appreciated. We haven't really seen, there are certain areas that we were expecting to see decreases in, and we've experienced them in gambling tax, admissions tax, parks and recreation, and the motor vehicle fuel tax, and of course the hotel motel lodging tax. Our property tax is coming in, it's just coming in a little bit slower, and eventually we will receive the monies. Sales tax, on the other hand, hasn't been hit as hard, and it's actually been pretty good, especially for those 3 months where we were comparing the COVID-19 periods compared to last year. So our consolidated general and street funds, you can see the actual activity from an operating standpoint. So through 2015 through 2019, we had healthy operating income. And that has a lot to do with the city council's financial policies. We've had conservative financial policies, and it's been very intentional, and it's served us very well going into this year. So as you can see in the chart, our revenues have been exceeding our expenditures, and in the current year's budget, our operating revenues either meet or exceed by a slight amount compared to our operating expenditures. We are still maintaining the 12% operating reserves as stated in the financial policies. This really drives everything that we do in terms of budget. Our general and street fund ending fund balance in 2020 year to date is at 10.5, almost $10.6 million, and is higher than where we actually ended in the prior years. But however, we're just at the halfway mark. Our cash position is very healthy, not far off from where we landed in 2019. And ending fund balance continues to increase. Our cash took a slight dip compared to 2019, but we're monitoring that to ensure that we have cash flow. This is our general and street fund summary. And I think there's two important things to see here, that compared to 2019 year to date, our operating revenues are down by about 1.5 million or 6.8% compared to where we are today, and the year to date estimate, we're down by 540,000 or 2.6%. Again, conservative policies and conservative estimates. On the expenditure side, departments are adhering to the city manager's directive, really watching what we're spending. And you can see that all departments have savings. The police department has lots of savings. Well, one, because they have a larger budget. They have some vacant positions, and they have some expenditure line item savings. So for example, jail through the first 6 months is only under $200,000 compared to a $950,000 budget. And then there's just, supplies, travel, training, professional services that are attributing to that. So at the end of June, we have just about $10.6 million in ending fund balance. We've maintained all of the budgeted reserves, and we've exceeded the budgeted portion just through the month of June. We've had some extra money that is going to be applied towards the 21 and 22 budget. So April is the first month of sales tax, and I don't think any of this is really a surprise. On the retail side, we've seen some increases. We've seen areas that were down, like the clothing stores and such, but then we've seen home improvements and online purchases increase. People are still going out to eat, and we had an major online service provider have some increases. We pretty much continue that trend for a May to May comparison. Again, people are still doing home improvements, making repairs on their vehicles, and the stores in the Lakewood Town Center and other areas, because they were still closed for part of the time, are seeing decreases. And then for June 2020, we're pretty much on target with where we were last year. We just have some shifting. Retail sales are up and the other areas are down. The other two items I wanted to point out are the development services. Development services is actually doing very well. The annual budget for recovery, remember the target is 85% over a period of time. And for halfway through the year, the recovery ratio is 95%. And when we look at the recovery from the time or the year that council adopted the policies, 85% versus the actual of 90%. We added public works development services permits, and the recovery ratio is there is 83% from a year-to-date perspective compared to the budget of 32%. But in looking at the 2016 to 2019, it's about 56% recovery. And then lastly, parks. Recovery ratio came in at 42%. Their target is 45%, but because of COVID-19, we're seeing a decrease. We anticipate that decrease will continue. As I'm seeing, there are a number of refunds that are being processed for July and August. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions for Ms. Kraus? And I can't see any with screen shared. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Branstetter or Mr. Bulkey? Who was that?
I think it was me.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you very much. And I don't know what page it's on, but could you speak to the REIT and where we're at and how it will impact us going forward on our capital projects?
Sure. I am going to just pull up another report.
What page is it on ours?
On yours. Sorry, let me just get there. Okay, so our read through June is below 2019 year to date. However, because we maintain conservative revenue estimates, especially for a one-time real estate excise tax, we're up by $270,000. And just with the recent numbers through August, our real estate excise tax is down by $335,000 compared to year-to-date August of 2019. And from a budgetary perspective, we're up by $446,000. So REIT is going pretty strong, stronger than what I had anticipated or what anybody could have anticipated. What that will do is increase the amount of monies that are available in the real estate excise tax that could be transferred over to capital projects.
Okay, so we're even though we're not doing as well as we did last year, our forward planning is based upon what we had budgeted, what we were intending to use, plus our budgeted amounts, and that's how we did our planning around. So we're okay from a capital perspective going forward in your mind?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I should say from a capital planning perspective as it relates to real estate excise tax.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just add on to that, since our real estate excise tax is doing better than anticipated in 2020, it's going to allow us some flexibility in 2021, particularly to fully fund all of our projects that had been funded with the TBD vehicle license fee that at this point in time looks like we're not going to have. So again, it provides us that flexibility so that we don't have to draw upon the general fund, meaning projects will move forward as planned.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Mr. Whalen.
Thank you very much. On the revenue side, Ms. Kraus, I just had a question for the city manager earlier today that might be helpful for everyone else to understand. My question was, as we look at the conservative projections that we made, which are now paying good dividends for us, I find it sometimes interesting how conservative we are, because we look at projections that sometimes are not much of an increase over the prior year's revenues. But going into 2021 and 2022 budgeting, are there some one-time issues or non-reoccurring revenue streams that we're going to be taking off the table for purposes of further projections?
Yes, there are some revenues that are easier to predict than others. So for example, sales tax, there are some revenues on the sales tax side that we consider as one-time, and that's primarily construction. So construction is really hard to estimate what will be coming in, and we'd hate to bank on the unknown sales tax revenue as it relates to one-time. Sometimes services is also considered a one-time. So really, if we're going to fund ongoing projects, we should be more conservative, because if we aren't and we don't meet our projections, then we'll have some implications, and we want to avoid that. Other things like property tax, those are dictated by the 1% increase.
Right.
Our gambling tax has been pretty steady, but with the COVID-19, that's been a little bit more difficult. However, we're seeing some things pick up. On the permits and fees, even though we have a fee schedule, it's really hard to know what the development is going to be. So you'll see there are some areas that are intentionally lower than what we actually came in the prior year. We know that there are permits out there, but to estimate that we're going to get those and they don't go through, again, that'll have some implications on the operating budget.
So going into the end of 2020, first part of 2021, as best we can tell, the impacts to our budget from COVID-19 are going to be modest at best because of the way we've handled our budget projections and our reserves.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Kraus, the very last portion of your report in our agenda packet is a review of performance measures with that essentially lists targets and then Q1 and Q2 data on performance. Do you just roll these up with, and are these really individual departmental data, or where is this tracked?
Well, I will say the performance measures are being reported by the departments.
Okay. I guess the one pair of performance measures that I was concerned about when I saw is I'm on page 104. And that's within the police department. And there are performance measures for professional standards. And two of the performance measures are use of force as % of arrests and use of force as % of calls for service. And I'm just wondering about those numbers, because when the police chief briefed us about use of force and how that was, he characterized the percentages of arrests or of calls for service that required a use of force that we were doing really well, and because the percentages were very small. But this seems to indicate that we're not really doing very well with respect to what our target for what we expect to do. So I guess that, what really is the significance of the target number in this chart? Is that really something that we intended to meet each year, or is it something we're working towards? And maybe if you could perhaps ask the chief is in his next quarterly report, he could address the discrepancies there where we're 2.5 or 3 times the target this past quarter in terms of those 2 use of force indicators. Because I know he's not on the meeting tonight. But that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions for Ms. Kraus? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
you. And we'll now move to prosecution services updates with Ms. Johnson.
Can you guys see me?
We can hear you.
Okay.
There you are.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council. My name is Samantha Johnson. I apologize about the lighting situation here. My internet is going in and out, so I'm as close to the router as possible. But I am your guys' city prosecutor. I know I haven't had the opportunity to meet you all in person, so hello this evening. I have provided you all with a memo of a snapshot of the prosecution services that the legal department has provided, as well as police advisory that I have done throughout my last 6 months here with the city. Notably, our department has kept up with what is going on with the pandemic. We have not had a backlog with criminal cases. We've been in contact with our victims. We've been providing services, our referrals for services for victims. But I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to ask me any questions as you have that may pertain to prosecution services or the memos that I provided.
Any questions from Ms. Johnson? Mr. Whalen.
And welcome. Nice to
Thank
meet
you.
Via Zoom. The question I have for you pertains a bit to Ms. Krause's report to us about what appears to be decreased revenues from our court and criminal prosecution work with regard to fines and forfeitures and those kinds of things. Do you have any explanation as to why we might see such a decrease over the last few months?
A decrease in receipt of fines? Was that the question?
Yeah, crimes and forfeitures, and maybe I misread the numbers, but it seems like we have a little bit of a dip. Is it just that we're not prosecuting things as much, or that just is limited activity and we're so successful at keeping our streets safe?
I do not have Mrs. Krause's memo in front of me. However, what I will say is there has been a large unemployment rate, and going through the court, I've noticed the court has been waiving legal financial obligations because people are either unemployed or they are homeless. The judge has been waiving the promissory note for the public defender fee. So I'm not certain if that's a better question for the court in regards to.
Looks like the city attorney is either raising her right hand to pledge something or has an answer.
I don't want to pledge anything, but sometimes when you're asked a question, some things don't come readily to mind. Within the last, I would say 2 or 3 years, there have been cases coming down that have restricted our ability to even create an accounts receivable on some of these folks. If somebody comes into court and the court finds that they are at a low enough financial level, we are not able to assign fines to them, or it's a lower fine. And that did not used to be the case, but now it's not just a matter of discretion, it's actually something that's in law.
Yeah, so every individual is provided a screening sheet that they provide their income and their dependents. Determines based on that whether or not they're indigent and they qualify for services through the court. If they have been found indigent, the likelihood of judge imposing she may impose legal financial obligations and then they're waived due to their financial status. And that is because of new case law that's come down in the last few years.
What about the jail services, Ms. Wachter? Are we experiencing a decrease in expenditures there because we're prosecuting less folks, or what?
We're experiencing a reduction there because the jails won't take people, or haven't been over the last couple months, particularly Pierce County. And so some of your jail costs are because of us booking felony suspects. Some of your jail costs are for us booking misdemeanants. Misdemeanants tend to stay less time. They come to their arraignment and we set conditions of release and so forth. But don't get excited about the reduction in jail costs is all I can tell you about that.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you both.
Yeah, kind of following up on that. With respect to the fines, do we routinely ask for restitution on property crimes? Because my understanding is those aren't at least as readily waivable.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we do ask for restitution. For certain cases, we can ask for restitution. At the beginning or the initiation of a case, we send out documents to individuals whose property has been affected or may have some sort of financial claim due to the criminal behavior. If we receive responses back from those people with the supporting documentation, we can ask for restitution. That is not a waivable situation. There is statutory authority for restitution. The judge does have to determine whether or not the expenditures that are requested are connected with the criminal activity. And there's certain cases, unfortunately, like a hit and run, you legally cannot ask for restitution. They can agree to pay restitution, but the law defines the crime as the running, not the hitting. So they say you can't get restitution for a hit and run. But as far as malicious mischief, just basically property destruction or certain DUIs where there's a collision involved, we do ask for restitution if we have the supporting documentation.
And is there anything that we've learned from prosecution in COVID that we can carry forward, like a broader use of ankle bracelets instead of jail time, or anything else?
I would definitely say we're holding less individuals relative to my practice in different jurisdictions. I did start 2 weeks prior to the stay-at-home order here in Lakewood, so at the beginning of March 2020. So my experience with the court has been during the pandemic and finding alternatives to prosecution and getting people to and from court. I think there's definitely room post-adjudication. Instead of asking for jail, we have alternatives such as work crew. They can go out and clean up the streets or do whatever is required of them there, or more community service hours. There's certainly food banks that are, shorthanded. So I definitely think we've looked at alternatives at sentencing rather than just placing people in jail. Pre-trial, because EHM has a financial component to it and people are struggling financially, we haven't been asking for that as much. However, people have tended to appear in court for the most part. I mean, we do have people that fail to appear, but they get, I would say, more opportunities to appear out of court now than they would have pre-COVID.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brandstetter.
Hey, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Johnson, we've had an ongoing and continued emphasis on efforts to help domestic violence victims. And I know that from time to some extent in the past that has been funded with grants or other funding rather than from our general fund. To the extent that that's still the case, do you anticipate our being able to maintain that as we move into another biennium with that supplemental funding?
From my understanding where we sit with the budget, we do still have the STOP grant that is funding half of there's 2 attorneys that support the law department in regards to criminal prosecution. So it's my understanding half of his salary is supported by the STOP grant. And then we have a 20-hour-a-week office assistant who's fully funded by the STOP grant. I believe, I understand, was speaking with Ms. Wachter and Ms. Schumer, is that we will continue to get that grant. So we should still be able to provide those services. The office assistant, that's the 20 hours a week. She does other things for the legal department, but she is mainly in contact with the victims, referring them to services, keeping them updated on cases, and helping file criminal cases. So I do anticipate that we will continue those services for the victims throughout 2021, 2022.
So is the STOP grant something though that does require annual renewal, or was it approved for as a multi-year grant that's just continuing?
Councilmember Branstetter, members of the council, the STOP grant is an annual renewal. We apply annually. We also participate in one of the committees at the county level that tracks the STOP grant, where the money's going, how it's being spent for the benefit of the domestic violence victims. And we have been in receipt of it, I think well over a decade, possibly as long as I've been working for the city.
Okay, so there's no risk of it fading away or being reduced because of the COVID situation.
It's not guaranteed, but it is a federal grant, and I would bet on it being maintained. The current point that it's at in the process is we are processing an extension through November 2021. So that's where we're at in the process right now. It's usually in the fall.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Whalen.
Thank you. Just one final follow-up question, Ms. Johnson and perhaps Ms. Wachter. With regard to the alternatives to prosecution sentencing, I know that you're talking about recommending requests for work crew in lieu of fines, which I think is fantastic. And you also mentioned possible work with food banks or other social service agencies that might have need. Is that something that we track? Because it seems to me that the value that we could place on those hours worked would be of something of interest to the community to show the value of the resources that are being utilized as an alternative to prosecution and sentencing. So in other words, if we showed, $20,000 of good community work by way of either street cleanup or service at the local food banks, I think that would be of interest.
Well, it's certainly something I can speak with the court administrator about. They're the ones who, the individuals who have those obligations have to report to.
Mm-hmm.
I am not quite certain what their tracking is, but I do think that would be of interest to the community. In addition, kind of piggybacking off the fines, the court does also authorize community service in lieu of fines. So instead of waiving the fines, sometimes they say if you've do 30 hours of community service, we'll waive the $500 legal financial obligation you have.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as far as tracking of that, I would have to check with the court administrator and see how the court tracks that information.
Very good, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Comments from Ms. Johnson? Well, thank you very much for coming tonight and bring us up to speed on the situation. And
Thank you all for having me.
we're hearing from you in the future.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks. We'll now move to a review of COVID relief funding allocations. And for this, we have Ms. Spear.
Actually, Mayor, I think I got this one.
I'm here if you want me to
Oh,
speak,
you are?
Mr.
Oh,
City
my
Manager.
God,
Yeah.
I thought I gave you the night off. What's going
No,
on?
I'm here. I'll just share my screen really quickly. This is page 117 of your packets this evening, council members. And if you recall last week, there was a conversation about the fact that there's now a second round of coronavirus relief fund dollars coming to Lakewood. And this is a total of $895,050. The way this round of funds are being handled is it's all of the same criteria from the Department of Treasury and Department of Commerce as the first round, the 1.79 million. And they have actually extended the amount of time to spend these dollars as well as round one to November 30th. And then per your conversation last week, the memo in front of you right now, first of all, summarizes the time that payroll is showing dedicated to COVID-related activities since March 1st per department here on this table. So you'll still see the vast majority is regular time funding. There is some overtime down in Parks and Rec and Police, but altogether it's about $256,500 in regular time and then almost $9,500 in overtime for a total of almost $267,000 as of August 31st. The rest of the discussion that was had last week was how to spend this new round of money, whether it would be identical to round one or if we were going to have new priorities or budget allocations. So based on your discussion, this is what's been put before you as a suggestion or recommendation. First of all, going back to the lottery that was held with the first round of dollars, there were 10 or 11 applicants that were not awarded any funds. And so going back to them, it's a total of about 115,000 that could go to them. Then there was a discussion about commercial landlords and helping to alleviate loss of rental or lease income that's happened since the shutdown. And so we're thinking $250,000 there. For Lakewood Child Care Service Providers, an additional $50,000. And then, as was mentioned by the city manager last week, looking at $200,000 right now allocated to staff payroll with the potential to go higher depending on how many dollars are left at the end of this time frame to spend these funds. And then the last piece to it would be using any funds that might be remaining at the end of the period for HVAC improvements at city facilities. So if you'll recall, some funds were provided early on to West Pierce Fire and Rescue, and about $140,000 of theirs was spent on these same types of improvements. So it's installing ultraviolet filters for air coming into the facilities just to provide an added level of safety for the public and for staff. So having that in there, should there be funds available, as well as additional PPE costs. So some of the same information, but in a graphical form, so you can see what's going on here as recommended: small business, commercial landlords, childcare, and then the city costs of payroll, and then perhaps the facilities. There's still about 180,000 that hasn't been allocated yet, and that is playing it by ear between now and then with these set priorities. If there happens to be an additional need for some more grants, then that's something that the staff could administer. So other than that, if there's any questions or direction from you, that's what we're looking for.
I do have a question, if I could.
Mr. Whalen, I guess I was going the wrong way there.
Ms. Spear, quick question. You mentioned on the small business assistance allocation, we're looking at 115, which equates to about 10 or 15 that didn't get monies in the first round. Can you give us a sense of the kinds of businesses that are both applying and receiving, and those that may receive in this round?
I can give that a try. I don't know exactly those that are in that second round. I've been working with the first round applicants. There's about 65 grants there, and they range from restaurants to barber shops to award engraving places to some types of manufacturing places. So it really does run the gamut.
Good.
And there are a good percentage that are, for lack of a better way to say it, English as a second language, meaning we've gotten translated applications, and we've worked with them in order to make sure that they're understanding the program clearly.
Well, that's fantastic, because that means that we're actually reaching those diverse communities that have needs. So that's great. Okay. All right, very good. Well, I appreciate that. I would be one to say the TBA or the monies yet to be allocated may depend upon how well and how successful we are in our outreach efforts to the small business community as well this time around. So it's really good work if we're getting folks that need interpretive services. That's great that we're reaching those communities. So the more the better.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Spear, the 115,000 recommended out of this allocation to go to small business assistance. You know, I think that it's good that we go back to folks who applied but who the lottery did not select. But if we stay with that amount, that would mean there would be no new opportunities to apply, because we wouldn't open it up for additional applications if we only put 115,000 into that. So is the window between now and November 30th long enough to be able to open up another application window, receive, process applications, and make awards?
I doubt we would be 100% successful with being able to send the money out in the amount of time that's left. Given the experience that we've had with the round one applicants, there are those that respond right away, and there's some that still haven't turned in their initial paperwork from July. So we're trying to reach out repeatedly to various businesses that have not yet responded at all. And so, yes, there's time to put a second round lottery out there, but whether 100% would be allocated by November 30th, I doubt. I think there would be some hangers on out there, some dollars that we wouldn't have spent if they weren't allocated elsewhere.
But if we had dollars that were not spent by November 15th, we could revert them to the payroll category. Is that not true?
That's the direction that we heard from council last week, yes.
So, you know, I think that I would be in favor of trying to reach a few more businesses by making another opportunity to apply and seek to be able to do that, particularly given that our payroll is not, our payroll costs are not significantly designated by additional work that we hadn't budgeted for. It's, most of it is regular time of where, like in any year, we don't always know exactly what's going to come up that an employee will have to work on. In this case, employees did that, but the money that was spent already on the payroll was money that we had in the budget. And while I'd like to recover it, if rather than give this money back to the federal government, I would like to do a bit more, or at least potentially do more to help the businesses and landlords, rather than just starting with as large a number of 200,000, 190,000 of that, meaning money that we already had in the budget for regular time. Anyway, we're just calculating, what did people actually work on, and seeing if we can pay for it in another way other than that what we were. So I guess I'd like to see a proposal that perhaps would put another $100,000 out there to try to capture another 10 to 12 new small business grants of people who didn't apply the first time. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Spear, for your report. I want to come back to that $200,000 number that could be moved up to 300,000 funds providing. Of the 200,000, let's just take that $200,000 mark. How much of that money is going to be used for overtime pay, and how much will be used for COVID-related costs? In other words, what I'm looking for here is a cost breakdown of just how much of that $200,000, if we accept this, how much of which is going to which?
Mr. Simpson, if I understand you right, the 200,000 that was discussed as a set aside right away for payroll is strictly that, it's payroll. The PPE costs and the HVAC stuff I mentioned, that's a different bucket. So the regular time in that chart on page 117 shows that most of that is regular time. There's about 9,500 to date in overtime. But all of those dollars have been identified because people are doing something significantly different than what they were anticipating this year.
All right. Well, I've got another question for you. You mentioned that $50,000 had been set aside for child care services. What would happen if we were to double that? Do we extend the length of time that these child care services can be working with our youth? What are their needs? Could they use an extra $50,000? I agree with Mr. Brandstetter about, I have some concerns about the $200,000. He's tending to lean more toward the business sector, where I'm leaning more toward healthcare, childcare services. So can you give me a little background on why $50,000 and not say $100,000?
To be perfectly frank with you, it's been difficult to reach out to childcare providers and have them able to provide the adequate sophistication to respond to a grant and get all of the paperwork that we need in order to turn around and provide them funds. So it's on the one hand, you've got large entities, maybe it's YMCA or YWCA that would be providing services, but then you have home run businesses or small businesses that the people just are, whether it's they're overwhelmed with everything that's going on, or it's just something they don't necessarily want to do. They're not as responsive as maybe some of the other small businesses have been in terms of saying, yes, I want a grant and here's all my paperwork to get it. So it's the administration stuff. And because of the time constraint that we're under, the thought was let's use the dollars elsewhere where we're going to probably be able to distribute it easier.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Spear, a couple of questions. First of all, explain how we're going to put this commercial landlord one together. What
Becky
limitations do we have and that kind of thing? Go ahead.
Becky Newton is taking the lead on that one, and she is reaching out to her contacts within the city of Lakewood to find, and I'll just use RPAI since that's right in the middle of town, that type of landlord that has multiple tenants, whether it's at a single location or in multiple mall locations, for instance, and finding out from them what type of support they may need because they've had to renegotiate leases or rent agreements. And so the idea here is that we would be actually minimizing the number of landlords we're dealing with in order to make sure that they're being made whole because multiple renters have been suffering because of COVID. So the thought here is rather than the model that you've seen to date with the 65 small businesses, we're not going to have nearly 65 commercial landlords involved. We're going to have those that have multiple spots where they're losing revenue made whole.
Okay, so what limits are there?
In terms of
what's the maximum amount you'll pay?
We haven't even figured that out yet. Ms. Newton is
Okay.
in the middle of reaching out to various landlords to get an idea. For instance, with the business grant, going back to that in round one, we limited that to $10,000, but that's not the idea here. We don't know what the max might be, but it certainly will be more than that. And so depending on the type of responses she gets back, we'll be able to get a better sense of what makes sense.
So, and what? Yeah, I'm losing my train of thought here. So you still have to work on a max
Yes.
amount. Okay, so it's not going to use the same type of, and what's escaping me is not-for-profits. Are they allowed to apply for that too?
I think if they were to qualify as a commercial landlord, the answer would be yes. I don't know how many nonprofits function in that role.
Well, they won't be the landlord. They'll be the.
They would, yeah. And that's who we're reaching out to, is specifically to the landlords for this,
Oh,
at least
okay.
this portion of the grant. The small businesses, that, yes, nonprofits are allowed to do that.
Okay. And then, I'll just leave it at that. And by the way, the county council is about to make a move and move some additional funds into their commercial landlord program, and folks in Lakewood are eligible for that also. They're going to significantly increase the size of the program, probably in the next 24 hours. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a little bit of confusion on that. My understanding, or I guess supposition, was that it was going to be similar to the county program where you reach out to the landlords, but actually it's the tenant's debt to the landlord that's being backfilled, or prospective obligation. So the tenant's getting their rent paid, the check goes to the landlord, not the land. There's an implication that if the landlord had renegotiated the rent, there's a backfill of what they gave as a discount. And I would hate to see that happen. I'd like to see it go to curing defaults of individual tenants to keep the business alive, which indirectly or very directly impacts the landlord because they get the check. So you're helping both of them.
That's the intent, Mr. Mayor. So my apologies if that didn't come out right.
I had a couple of questions kind of along the line of some of what Mr. Brandstetter said. But first, with respect to the HVAC modifications, I have serious doubt as to whether that is appropriate, because three things would have to happen. One, there'd have to be the inventory and supply chain of whatever parts or modifications we would want available. The second one is there'd have to be a contractor available who could do it in a timely fashion. And the third one is even that those two things would have to happen by November 30th, and it would have to be used in December to be reimbursable under federal law or withstand audit, because whatever you buy has to be for use in the 2020 year, so, or at least available for the use in that year. And so I think that is maybe a leftover would be okay, but I'd rather see it go more to business relief, child care relief. And with all the child care organizations that are registered with DSHS, I think if you spam those, that experiences in some areas have been that they're more than willing to chase the money. But so I would like to see the city part of it as a smaller reserve. We can do that on November 30th. So the question on that then becomes, what is our best burn rate been on? Are the money we have out there, or the money that you've seen in programs, whether they're ours or others, which ones are successful in actually getting the money to the recipients?
If you're asking between the categories of business, the human services, and the public partners, is that what you mean?
Right. Well, just if we lined up everything we've allocated the money to, what's actually getting out into the pockets or the treasury or the bank account of the intended recipient, as opposed to being processed or applied for.
I'm sorry if I'm not understanding you correctly, but the small businesses, we're about halfway there with distribution. Part of that is timing with the city's financial process, which does 2 check runs a month, but it's also in terms of how quickly people are sending us back the information that we require. Out of the 3 nonprofit or public partners, I should say, 1 of the 3 has gotten its distribution, and we're still awaiting paperwork on the others. And then the human services.
What are they? What are we getting money to, as opposed to having applications for?
Funding has been provided to West Pierce Fire and Rescue, Nourish Pierce County, and the Lakewood Public Library. We don't have that distribution done yet because we're waiting on paperwork. In terms of the human services, that has been allocated to about 10 different entities, none of whom have come back with their reimbursement requests yet. They know that they have the executed contract, but we just are waiting for information to come back from them to turn around and distribute the funds. And then, as I mentioned, we're about halfway with the small businesses.
So half the money's out on small businesses, actually out the door. Nothing's out on human services. And
correct.
Other government entities are essentially going to be at 100% when the library gets a check.
Yeah.
See, I think that's where our problem's going to be in the next 60 days, is actually getting money out the door. Do we need to allocate any of this money to additional temporary staffing to process this?
There's been some discussion about that because of some other staffing things that are happening this fall. I don't know if the city manager wants to take that one.
Mr. Caulfield.
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a moment. What's the question again?
Well, we currently, Ms. Spear brought us up to speed, and our burn rate on the human services right now appears to be 0. We're going to be at 100% on other governmental entities as soon as the library gets a check, and we're about 50% on commercial landlord or commercial tenants. I see this as a significant problem in the next 60 days, actually getting money out and to the intended recipients, no matter what the allocation is, and was asking if we need to spend some of this money on additional temporary staffing to actually process these things or encourage the completion of the applications.
So a comment and a response. And so my comment is, even before we got this second allocation of funding, we knew it was going to be difficult just to get all of the original funding of $1.79 million that we received out the door by then October 30th. Thankfully, they've given us another 30 days. In terms of staffing, last week I did authorize bringing up one of our staff, our human services coordinator, to full time to have him work on getting, again, these dollars out the door so that we have additional staff resources to be able to do that.
You think that's going to do it?
To be frank, Mayor, I don't know. Again, getting back to Ms. Spear's comments, a lot of it depends on, the reaction that we get from people who, respond to our inquiries that the funding is available. And then making sure that they, unfortunately, we have to have the proper paperwork and the documentation. Otherwise, we're going to get hammered, this time next year when we're going through an audit, not just by the state auditors, but also by most likely the federal government as well. And so we need to make sure that, we abide by the rules and the regulations that the Treasury Department has put out. I think another issue that we're facing is there's a lot of money out there that's being made available to all of these same organizations that we're chasing. For example, the Tacoma Pierce County Economic Development Board recently got a $580,000 CARES Act grant, and they're in the process of doling out $5,000 grants to individual businesses. Likewise, the state of Washington, the Commerce Department, late last week announced that they are making available either 36 or 63 million for childcare services to a number of nonprofits throughout the state. And then childcare organizations can then go to these various nonprofits. I think they identified 16 of them or so. So there's just
I think that one may be going to entities that were under 500,000 in the county.
Right. But the point is that there's a lot of money and resources out there. For example, another area, we made a considerable amount of funds available to LASA for rent and utility payment, to individuals who needed that. Thankfully, actually, Pierce County, I think, Mayor, you had mentioned we had provided a list of all of our multifamily complexes to Pierce County. And since we had that data, Pierce County actually got out ahead of us on that. And so some of the folks that we're talking to are actually saying, yeah, I already got money from Pierce County. So thanks, city, but I'm good for now.
So is somebody like LASA saying they can't do it?
No, they're doing it. It's going to be interesting to see, how. As far as one thing that we will not do is we're not going to give them more money. They've got their hands full with what they have right now.
Well, I'm thinking if there are 10 human services providers, there may be some who've found that they bit off more than they can chew, and we'll have to account for that too.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I would ask for council and mayor is, some flexibility on our end to be able to, if we see opportunities, like for example, when we saw the childcare opportunity, we jumped on that. So if we see opportunities for more small business assistance or increased commercial landlord assistance, let's not hold us to these numbers right here, but rather, let's get this money out, because we all know wherever the money goes, it's going to do some good. It just needs to get out there.
Yeah. So one thing, just if we're getting a little panicky on it, one thing to consider is that property management firms, whether they are residential or commercial, essentially are running the opposite of this program right now, and they have the systems in place. They take applications, they process paperwork, and they take in money. But to take applications, process paperwork, and hand out money is virtually the same process for the benefit of some of the same people. So I had thought since day one that rental assistance should be run through property management, not homeless service providers, but I have not prevailed in my arguments on that.
And then, Mayor, if I might, not to muddy the waters, I was going to include this in my reports by the city manager, but we learned late this afternoon that we have been awarded another $450,000+ in CARES Act money for CDBG on top of the $350 we already get that we're having a problem, making available.
It's like looks like the Wayland Pavilion's going to have a really sanitary bathroom.
Well, those dollars can only be used for, low income type businesses and individuals. So, but our understanding too is those monies do not have a deadline of November 30th. Those are dollars that need to be routed through our 5-year CDBG consolidated plan in partnership with Tacoma. So that's going to take a little bit more time to go through that process, not just with Tacoma, but also with HUD. But again, it's more money that we're receiving.
Right, Ms. Farmer.
I think we've had a really thorough discussion, and I am comfortable with the categories that we're interested in, making sure that there's funding. And while I'm interested in seeing city payroll being made whole, I completely understand and want to get as much money out the door as possible to childcare residents and also to commercial, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd feel very comfortable having city staff take this direction and capitalize on opportunities as they can, possibly bringing on temporary staff, whatever it takes. And then if there is anything left over, where it certainly won't go to waste. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I too, I didn't mean, if it sounded otherwise, I didn't mean to criticize the categories. I think they're all going appropriate places. I just would hope that, given the flexibility, that staff could reallocate money to where it's doing some good and actually getting out the door. For example, childcare or the commercial lease programs did take off and start burning money, we could move things around within the categories to help those folks and not be in those rigid columns that we see in that appear on a graph. Any other questions, comments from council?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm gonna back up on that and what Councilmember Farmer said and you. I think we have to give staff flexibility now, because if we are held to the 11th, all our state money that we've received is now November 30th, which gives us, less than 90 days to spend it. And in my day job, it's been much more difficult than I would have initially thought to get this money out the door. And then I'm reading the thing about the CDBG money, and that's that's 6 month money. So we have a few more not options with it, but we have a little bit more time to figure it out, and it deals specifically with housing. So we've got some additional help there, but I think now is the time for maximum flexibility within the parameters that the council sets, so that the money can get spent on helping people.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Moss.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I got knocked off the internet and I had everybody's name and the mic, but I was the only one on the screen, so I missed part of the conversation. But I would offer my support in allowing the staff to be flexible with the way they distribute the funds.
All right. Well, you've got a tough job. Who thought it would be so hard giving away money? But it's got a lot of strings on it. They get tangled up on the way. So thank you. And I think you've got consensus from council, unless I hear people pipe up now, to use your judgment and some flexibility on those general categories to make sure they get to a good place.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Thanks. Then we move to reports by the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening again, council. Just a couple updates. Transportation projects, both Veterans Drive and Onyx, are moving forward. Just want to let you know that here in the next few weeks, asphalt will be going down on Onyx. Asphalt is already down. New asphalt is already down on Veterans. Veterans is now moving on to its last leg. On both projects, just want to be clear in terms of pouring concrete and asphalt. As we get later into November, into early November, late into October or early November, that's all going to be weather dependent. Our goal is to have both of those projects as fully completed, if not completed, by the end of this year. But if not, again, depending upon weather, either one or both might have to button up and then come back and finalize it in the spring. But we'll keep you appraised of that. I can tell you that both of our contractors on both of those projects want to get the projects done. So they are moving as aggressive. They are moving forward as aggressively as they possibly can. On the park side, a couple of projects to report on. Harry Todd, the waterfront restoration project. So our contractor kicked that off last week. Essentially the summer's over down at the park, so they have taken control of that, and they're going to begin moving forward on improvements there. That'll continue into next spring, and then hopefully have everything completed and ready for next summer. Likewise, if you've been down at Forest Silicon Park along Angle Lane and the parking and Angle Lane, so that's all coming together quite nicely. They put down some asphalt late last week. Restrooms are expected to be installed and up and running sometime in October. Also, the pavilion project, the warming kitchen and the restrooms. So the contract is making its rounds with our contractor, and pre-construction meetings expected to occur here in the next week or two, and then they'll get underway on that. Since that's indoor work, that should go relatively quickly and is not weather dependent. Speaking of weather dependent, the farmers market has been very, very successful you know, given the circumstances. A lot of the vendors have been very, very pleased with the outcome in terms of attendance, as well as, you know, how well they've been doing in terms of their pocketbook. And the last one is supposed to be this Friday. However, this weekend I was talking with our Parks and Recreation Director, Mary Dodsworth, and a number of vendors, not all of them, but a good number of them asked whether or not it could be continued for, you know, a few more weeks into October. And so long story short, we're going to give it a try. So this one on Friday will not be the last one. It will continue on to September 25th and into the first, second, or even the third Friday of October, again, depending upon weather, as well as the willingness of the vendors to be out there. Again, you'll probably see a smaller number of vendors, but again, a super majority of them have an interest in wanting to continue to come out and be out there on Fridays. So during the last session, there was a bill that originated out of the Senate, 1754. It's called the Hosting of Homeless, and it was specific to religious organizations. And long story short, what the legislation does is it significantly limits the ability of cities and counties to regulate homeless encampments that are operated by religious organizations within those respective communities. It is something that we're mandated to get codified into our code. One of the challenges that we're facing is, you know, do we codify it, kind of interpret what the state has said and put that in our code, understanding that a lot of times this type of legislation gets changed and updated and we have to come back and do that. So right now what we are contemplating is actually going a different route and essentially hyperlinking the code from the state to our code under Title 18A. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. We expect to kick off this review with the Planning Commission later this fall. It'll also have to go, you know, through the traditional, you know, SEPA process and public hearing process and things like that. I know maybe there are going to be some folks in the community that appreciate this new legislation. Also, there are probably some who are not going to. I do want to say that Association of Washington Cities did oppose this legislation because they felt that there was too much taking of local authority and local jurisdiction on that. However, the state legislature, while they took that into account, they still move forward with what they move forward. So again, more to come on that as it makes its way through the Planning Commission later this fall. And probably we'll get back to the council. I don't know if it'll get back in front of you before the end of the year, but certainly the early part of 2021. Last week I mentioned that the Sound Transit Board was looking at, you know, essentially realigning their projects based on the economic downturn caused by COVID-19. Actually want to recognize Tiffany Spear, Ms. Spear. Today she was tracking the Sound Transit's executive board, and the recommendation from Sound Transit staff, specifically as it relates to Lakewood, was to put a pause on two projects. One are parking improvements in both Tacoma and Lakewood at some Tacoma Sound Transit stops, as well as in Lakewood, the Sounder Station, the expansion of parking, as well as putting a pause on building the new Sounder maintenance facility off of Steilacoom Boulevard. Again, those aren't the only two projects. There's a number of projects up and down their service area, north and south and east and west, that are on that list. Ultimately, the Sound Transit Board is looking to make a decision on whether or not to put those projects on pause here in the near future. My recommendation, and unless I hear any objection from the council, is that we draft a letter expressing not just our concern, but our support for those projects to continue moving forward until really, quite frankly, I think more economic data is available. Ultimately, the Sound Transit Board has identified a timeline to really address all of their projects in June of 2021, based on what the current economic conditions are. And the reason I say that is because I remember going through this about 10 years ago after the Great Recession. And, you know, initially, Sound Transit put on pause a number of projects, but then the economy came back. And then very quickly, everything was back on board. So I would just suggest that maybe Sound Transit maybe kind of learn from that last process and maybe just wait a little bit rather than putting projects on the back burner. So again, unless there's an objection from the mayor and the council, would like to move forward with a letter, again, expressing our concerns, but also expressing our support that those projects not be put on pause. Also, I understand one of our representatives on the board from Pierce County, the county executive, did have, if not the same, similar comments at the executive board meeting this afternoon. Tomorrow, myself, I think it's tomorrow, or late sometime this week, myself and Paul Busich, our Public Works Engineering Director, is going to be meeting with WashDOT again as a follow-up to a conversation that we had back in, I think, late July, early August, regarding the shared use path in front of JBLM, the pedestrian bike trail, and JBLM doesn't want it, Sound Transit doesn't want it, really nobody wants it. And you know, to have a continued discussion about having those dollars reallocated and having that shared use path, instead of going along I-5, actually go from along the DuPont-Steilacoom Road, connecting into Northgate, and then connecting into Lakewood and Edgewood and into Washington Boulevard, and then Gravelly Lake Drive, and then coming all the way around to the new Thorn Lane Connector Road. Also, that proposal has support from Steilacoom and DuPont, as well as University Place. We have subsequently reached out to those three agencies to garner their interest, and they think it's, quite frankly, a no-brainer. Likewise, we have been in contact with Pierce County. Last week, we had a conversation with their Parks and Recreation Director, and they too support that concept. So again, tomorrow, more people coming together to continue to have the discussion, and we'll keep you appraised of what the outcome is of that. So with that, Mayor, that's my report.
I just thank you. Questions for the city manager, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. City Manager, I have a question about the legislation whereby homeless encampments can be placed on church property. And I understand, I'm going to use a bit of an analogy here. As most people understand from those who have served in the military, there are regulations. And regulations can be looked at as by the book or as a suggestion. Is your connecting 1754 to our 18A an example of suggestion?
No, Councilmember Simpson, it's a mandate from the Washington State Legislature that this is how we are going to have to operate with religious facilities and homeless encampments on their properties.
So why do we need to link it to 18A?
Because that's the appropriate place to have it codified in our code, Councilmember.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Councilmember Simpson, if there was another place to put it, we would put it there. But it's a land use item, and that's the appropriate place for it.
I appreciate that, Mr. City Manager. Thank you.
And doesn't it, while extremely broad, doesn't it have some limitations as to what has to be available for them to do that might not be enforceable if we didn't have it in code?
That's correct, Mayor. We need to, yes. Short answer is yes.
I would just note on, before we go to council comments, a follow up on city manager's comment on the shared use path. That initiative is a direct result of the existence of SSMCP. It came out of an executive committee meeting of SSMCP, and Pierce County Parks has actually come up with Pierce County Roads come up with preliminary design because a lot of that road is county maintained road, and everybody's on the same wavelength except WashDOT, and WashDOT now can't build it. So the real question is whether the money can be utilized for shared use path. It's not going to happen down I-5 because Sound Transit and JBLM won't give up the property necessary for it. And so there's probably enough money to build a loop completely around JBLM. So step one is to get the shared use path that goes around back through North Fort 2, 3, and 4 are trail segments that the bicycle community would love. A total of about 36 miles. All right, we'll move to council comments. Mr. Brandstetter, here in the upper left corner. Bingo.
I'm really good, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Simpson.
No comment, sir.
Mr. Bulkey.
On here. We had our first meeting of the youth council tonight. So that was very nice, very well done. They all zoomed in, and I said a few words and talked about the importance of the youth council for the city of Lakewood and the city council in particular. They were asked to introduce themselves and talk about issues that were important to them. The vast majority were Black Lives Matter, social justice issues, and mental health. And mental health is kind of a carryover from last year. So I'm interested to hear as we have discussions going forward. I'd also note that tomorrow at the Human Services Committee of the County Council, there's going to be that MCERT group that I think came and spoke to the city manager one time. I don't know that they've ever been in front of the city council, but they do come into Lakewood for some mental health crisis issues, not an impending crisis. They're a little bit, that's for the MOC-T to deal with, but, and they're making a presentation tomorrow, and they have a heat map on there that shows how many times they've been in Lakewood this year. So there's some interest in that. But back to the youth council, they then got a presentation from various staff members about the different committees, because remember now they'll be asked to, in the next meeting or somewhere along the way, to be new representatives, to where they want to be representatives, what committees they want to be on. So I think staff did a very nice job tonight of telling them about how the committees work and what specifically what subjects they deal with. So it'll be interesting to see. It's a young group, a lot of sophomores, few juniors on there. Really a changing of the guard from prior years, because we had a lot of seniors lead the last couple of years. So lots of energy. So we'll see where it goes, but I just wanted you guys to know about that.
All right, Ms. Farmer.
It was a popular night. I gave remarks at the school district board meeting, and they thanked us for our work on the fireworks and our upcoming vote. And at least on the part of some, there is a support for some sort of restriction. And tomorrow I'll be attending the large city government meeting for AWC, getting all my meetings mixed up. I think I'm triple booked during that time, so that should be fun. And then on Wednesday, I'll be attending the second diversity training put on by the National League of Cities through AWC. And the first one was very good. I believe Councilmember Brandstetter attended that as well. Just a fantastic training. So I'm very much looking forward to the training tomorrow, and that's it for me.
Thank you. Ms. Moss. Who is apparently frozen in time right now. Mary, Ms. Moss, can you hear us? Well, you see if you come back, go to Mr. Whalen, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have really nothing to report this week, although we skipped over council comments last week. And I just wanted to report that Councilmember Moss and I had the opportunity to attend a ribbon cutting in Lakewood at an apartment complex at the invitation of Candace Wesley, who you may remember is the woman who sought a proclamation from the city for the Ceasefire Tacoma group that she sponsors. Well, Mary and I went out there and met with a wonderful group of people who had decided that they would turn a dirt patch and broken concrete of a patio into a really lively community garden with 8 raised beds that they had made, and they brought in plants and dirt, and the community of neighbors came together to really do something pretty special. So it was a neat opportunity for us to be there, to give a little bit of a, quote unquote, formal city blessing that they really invited us to provide. So I enjoyed that, and those kinds of connections, I think, reap good benefits for all of us, because it allows us to get to communities that we don't otherwise get the opportunity to enjoy and be part of. And so hopefully we can do more of that down the road. Small steps in the right direction for sure.
All right. And Ms. Moss. Fades in and out. Just make one final comment while we're waiting to see if Mary can get back linked in. I attended the Puget Sound Regional Council Transportation Policy Board meeting representing Sound Transit, on which I represent Lakewood. I guess the generic news out of there is the 21 to 24 tip is should be up on the PSRC website now, and it will be considered for adoption by the Puget Sound Regional Council as a whole in October. So our executive board, I believe. So we'll see where that goes. There doesn't seem to be anything that is divergent from past practices. And Ms. Moss, if you're available.
Hey, Mayor, I just gave her a call. She's going to try. There she is. She's back on.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I keep getting knocked off the internet for some reason. I'm not sure. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update. I did attend the Lakewood Promise Zoom meeting, and they went through they did a review of their 2020 work plan, and they are working with the colleges trying to figure out the best way to get the specific information to the students pertaining to the field of interest, which I thought was really neat, because if they if they can come up with a way to let the person that want to be a fireman, say for instance, that they can teach them something there to give them an idea, is this really what you want? So it was something along those lines that they're working on. It's not in place yet, but that would be good. They will be meeting with the council October 28th. It was a good meeting. I enjoyed Mr. Humphreys doing a really good job getting the information and trying to do the best he can to help. And I did hear Councilman Deputy Mayor Whalen talk about their meeting that we attended. It was a good meeting, and I had the opportunity to attend another one that was very similar the following week, whereas it was interesting because they had the mother of Justin. They were celebrating her birthday. They did another garden, a community garden, and they did an honor to her son. So it was really confusing. But what they're trying to do is that every year on that date, they're going to have the mother's birthday celebration, the son's remembrance, and then the community garden. So it was really interesting, but very different from what what we were used to hearing and the way we was carried out. A lot of the Seattle Times coverage was there. I had an opportunity to, sorry, my house phone, I can't stop it. I had an opportunity to talk a little bit about LMCC to the Seattle Times. They seemed interested, and they was excited to get my card. So we'll see where that goes. So, but it's been interesting the way we've been meeting and the things that's been happening. So I've enjoyed it. So thank you.
All right. Anything further to come before council? And we're adjourned.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.